Hey guys, it's been a while, so I thought I'd do a double feature for reviews for you for Star Trek The Next Generation. So let's have at it. Our first one is Tin Man. It's episode number 68, and it originally aired on April 29th, 1990. It was written by Dennis Putnam Bailey and David Bischoff, and it was directed by Robert Scherer. Now the story starts out with Tam Elbrin, who is a Betazoid telepath of extraordinary ability, and he joins the Enterprise for this episode. And a deep space probe has discovered a living spaceship orbiting a dying star. And Starfleet has dubbed the alien Tin Man. Now all attempts to communicate with it have failed, and Starfleet wants the Enterprise to take Tam Elbrin to meet Tin Man, hoping to establish a dialogue with it, since Tin Man's proximity to the dying star puts it in great danger. Now unfortunately, Tin Man is in a sector claimed by the Romulans, and the Romulans have monitored the transmissions from the probe. Now two of their ships race toward Tin Man, hoping to gain the advantage of first contact. But since the Enterprise is faster, it reaches the system first and takes up a position 18 minutes away by impulse. Now a short time later, the first Romulan cruiser hurtles by, and fires on the Enterprise and causes 70% damage to the shields. Now Tam fears for Tin Man and alerts it to the danger, but Tin Man comes alive and spins out an energy burst that destroys the Romulan ship. And also it actually debilitates the Enterprise as well. Now several hours later, the second Romulan ship appears, and it claims right of vengeance and heads off to destroy Tin Man. Now with no other choice, Picard allows Tam and Data to beam over to Tin Man, as Data and Tam have established a relationship, and Tam doesn't seem to get along with other people because he's basically on sensory overload, basically, and since he can't sense anything from Data, because Data doesn't have any emotions or thoughts, exactly like humanoids do, he seems to get along with Data much better. So anyway, after joining Tam in a telepathic union, Tin Man releases another energy burst, but this time the burst acts as a repulsor wave, which throws the Enterprise 3.8 billion kilometers. Now seconds later the star explodes, but not before Tam transports Data back to the Enterprise and disappears into deep space with Tin Man. And that is the end of the episode. Now, the director of this one, Robert Scherer, felt like he was a little bit disappointed with it. He said it wasn't his best work because he felt like they struggled to put up the sense of this Tin Man being a living ship. He felt like they tried, but they just did not make it happen. One thing they did do, as far as the sounds inside Tin Man, is they actually had a man eat some pizza, and they put a stethoscope to this guy's stomach and recorded the noises of his pizza being digested, and that was actually the sounds that they used for inside Tin Man. So when you hear all those noises as Data is walking through, that's actually a man digesting pizza. But that's what they used for it. And there was some criticism, a little bit of criticism of this episode, that it was a little bit too much like Star Trek the Motion Picture, where there's, as you recall in that first movie, Commander Decker decides that he wants to join with V'ger, who is alone and lacking something, and together they come together and create a new life form. Well, actually, this was not necessarily just a rip-off of Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was actually a story that originated as a spec script by Dennis Russell Bailey under the name of Dennis Putnam Bailey and David Bischoff. And that was based on a 1970s short story called Tin Woodman, and later a novel by that. And the short story had actually been nominated for a Nebula Award in 1977. Now, whether they did somehow come across the script of Star Trek the Motion Picture and were influenced back then, I don't know. They were both stories were created around the mid-70s, so that's only speculation. Who knows if there was any real influence off one another. But I don't think it's a complete rip-off either. Now, personally, about this particular episode, um, I have mixed feelings about it. I do like how Data is able to connect with the main character in this episode, in the fact that Data does not have any emotion, so there's nothing for him to sense. So he's able to connect with him. And Data, in the end, actually realizes that his purpose is that he belongs with his family on the Enterprise, as opposed to the Tin Man and also with Tam Elbrin belonging together too. So that's kind of a nice, feel-good message at the end. But, I agree with the director Robert Scherer that there were better episodes than this one, but not a bad one nonetheless. So that is Tin Man. The only other thing I have to add about that is that Rick Sternbach and Greg Gine's design for Gomtu was inspired by the thermal pods in Buckaroo Banzai. And Gomtu was the name that was given to Tin Man by Tam Elbrin. So, just a little nugget for you guys for that one. So that is the episode Tin Man. Now our next episode is called Hollow Pursuits, a complete different episode than the one we just looked at, much lighter. And this one was episode number 69. It originally aired on May 5th, 1990. It was written by Sally Caves, and it was directed by Cliff Bull. Now this episode opens up very strangely. We see a man who we learn is Lieutenant Barclay enter 10 Forward, and he basically tells off his superior officers, LaForge and Riker, and beats them up when they give him orders. And even though they say he's acting with insubordination, he tells them to get out of his life and beats them up. And then, of course, Counselor Troy is very excited by his confidence, and all of a sudden it breaks up, and we realize that this is just a holodeck simulation, and Lieutenant Barclay is told to report. Now, meanwhile, the Enterprise takes on tissue samples needed for an outbreak of an exotic fever on a distant planet. And unknown to the crew, the suppliers of the samples still use a chemical called Invidium in their medical containers. Now, several of the engineers become contaminated with the Invidium and pass it on to the machines they service. Meanwhile, Picard is balking at an unsatisfactory work report for Barclay. And not willing to entertain LaForge's request that Barclay be transferred, Picard orders LaForge to work harder to make Barclay part of the team. Now LaForge goes looking for Barclay and discovers him on the holodeck, this time engaged in fantasies about the senior staff, and in one scenario he sees them all dressed in Three Musketeers type outfits. Now LaForge promises to keep quiet about Barclay's pastime, but strongly suggests that he meet with Troy. Now, unable to break his addiction, Barclay heads back into the holodeck, and when he fails to report for a meeting, Riker, LaForge, and Troy enter the holodeck and bring him out. Now, at the same time, the Invidium begins interfering with the systems of the Enterprise. An anti-grav unit fails, and Transporter 3 quits working. Now, worst of all, the injectors for the matter and antimatter streams in the warp drive lock and begin propelling the Enterprise recklessly ahead. Now, LaForge pulls his engineering team together to try to uncover the source of the malfunctions before it's the end of the Enterprise. And when Barclay suggests a line of discussion that helps the team discover the Invidium, the Enterprise is saved, and under Troy's guidance, Barclay abandons his holodeck fantasies. And that is the end of the episode. So obviously this one is a completely different episode than Tin Man here in its tone. And there was some speculation that this was a jab at Star Trek fans who were self-absorbed and obsessed with the show so much that they were oblivious to reality. But of course, Michael Piller denies this and says it wasn't specifically about Star Trek fans, but it certainly was about fantasy life versus reality, and sometimes we are often so caught up in the fantasy world that we're not able to deal with reality. And how often is that the case, where we are often having so much struggle with our everyday lives that to escape and get away, we either turn on the television or we watch a movie. That's certainly a big thing for us today. So definitely a relevant episode, but this by and large is a really just fun and light one. Dwight Schultz, who already had some popularity after being on the A-Team in the 80s, and also being in, at the time he was in a movie with Paul Newman. So he was running really hot, and he really delivers in this character of Barclay. You can just see the wheels going on in Dwight's head as how he's portraying this character, and he does so well. And I think we all kind of have a sympathy, and we kind of identify with Barclay in a way that sometimes we don't with the other characters, who seem like they're a lot more in control than Barclay is. So I really enjoyed it for that reason. There are a lot of funny parts of this episode, but one of the funniest things is in the holodeck during the Three Musketeer scene, and where they make Troy the goddess of empathy. And the payoff, of course, is when they go to pick up Barclay. And of course the other characters are unhappy that they're being made into musketeers, including Picard's one, even Riker, Geordi, and Data are all Three Musketeers. And of course Riker has a little bit of problem with that, and he wants just to have a little good talking to Barclay. And Troy wants to calm him down, of course, that this is just they can't interfere with his creative fantasy life. That is before she runs into herself as the goddess of empathy. And even Riker can't help but crack a smile when he sees that. And of course Troy's smile turns into a very sinister look, and she has a few words to say to her holodeck self before they bring out Barclay. So this is the first time that we see Barclay in Star Trek The Next Generation. Obviously the fans really liked him, because we see him once again in several other episodes in the series. And a good start to a very great character. So comment below what you think of this particular episode. I really enjoyed it. I think other than the Lwaxana Troi episodes and the Q episodes, I think the ones with Barclay have the most humor in them, and I really enjoy that change of pace sometimes when we have some very heavy Star Trek TNG episodes to deal with sometimes. So thanks for listening to both of these reviews, guys, and I'll talk to you next time.